Hey, good afternoon, everybody. Can you hear me loud and clear? Okay. So my name is Zaheer. I'll be hosting this Green in Micro Network Plus Lunch and Learn webinar series with you. And today this is webinar number 46, and we have this webinar every sort of month, and the time is between 12:30 to 1:30. And I'll go over quickly with you on some of the sort of background about the Green in Micro Network Plus. So the Green in Micro Network Plus is a funded UKRA funded project led by Professor Prashant Kumar at University of Surrey. And then there is a core management team of the COIs that is from University of Bath, University of York, UK Centre for Ecology and Hydrology, University of Oxford, and we also have the colleagues now. They were based at University of Bath, and now they are at Institute of Hydrology in Germany, and myself based at University of Cranfield. So another thing about the Green Network Plus Lunch and Love webinar series is that this is a series that we run every month and will run until 2027. All the Green in Network members generally receive an email about these webinar events, but also one of the key thing is that you do need to register for these events to receive the web link. So I just wanted to remind you that once you receive an email about these webinars, please do register for the webinar so that you can have access to the and get a link for the webinars. So the previous webinars are also available on sort of a YouTube network and the LinkedIn. And each webinar has two speakers we have. And for today's one, I'll introduce you later the speakers we have for today. Another thing I just wanted to highlight with you is one of our sort of a first major sort of output from the Green in Micro Network Plus is the 10 question papers on the indoor greening and environmental quality. So there is a link there. You can simply write these 10 questions on the indoor greening and environmental quality, and I'm sure you will get it. So that is a huge sort of initiative that was taken by Green in Network Plus as a team, and that involves the collaborators across Europe, USA, Australia, India, and Brazil. It's typically looking at what are the biggest research questions and what we know about them at the moment, and what are the future directions on those sort of topics relevant to greening our indoor environments, and how does it impacts our health and quality in our homes and in the workplaces. Next slide, please. So before I introduce today's speaker, we have two speakers. One is Matthew Clark, and other one is Alexander. Yeah, they are with us. So I just wanted to mention you a couple of the things. Today's session is being recorded, and this recording will be available on the social media platform, and I understand that will be the YouTube. So another thing, before now moving forward, we will have the question and answer sessions at the end of both the talks. So you can see there is a Q and A tab at the top of the screen in this webinars. So you can write your questions as soon as you have them during the presentations, but we'll have the Q&A session at the end of the both presentation. We'll have over 10 minutes to take your questions. So I will now go with Alexander. Is this correct now? Yeah, okay. So we'll go with our first presenter today with Alexander. And before I hand over to Alexander, I will introduce briefly Alexander. So Alexander is an interior landscape designer with 20 years of experience in horticulture, working across 3 continents and climates ranging from the humid tropics, soaring heat of drought, to sub-zero temperature as low as -30 degrees. He possesses extensive hands-on nursery experience with strong technical design expertise, providing a deep practical understanding of plant health, microclimates, and long-term performance in interior and exterior environments. And with formal training in architecture and landscape architecture. He specializes in living walls. He's also able to bridge living systems with the built environments, delivering creative interior landscape solution with healthy and robust planting. Over to you, Alexander.
Thank you so much. I'll just share my screen. First of all, good afternoon, everybody listening on the greater web. So today I'm here to talk about bringing the outside in and how interior planting systems can be a benefit in the interior space. So the concept of bringing the outside in is certainly not a modern ideology. In fact, integration with the environment has long been recognized as an integral part of the human experience. We have records going back from 1350 BC, which document that the ancient Egyptians created high-tier residential design featuring enclosed garden estates integrated with signature rectangular water features. We even go to the classical Greeks and the Romans, who frequently featured villas centered around an atrium or peristyles, which would integrate the indoor living with open-air gardens and natural light. The House of Venti in Pompeii is actually a fantastic example of this. And we even go a bit more forward with the Alhambra garden courtyards built by the Moors, which incorporate the intricate gardens, the fountains, the pools within the enclosed, ornate buildings, all these things which merge the scent and sound of water within the architecture. This is not just a Western ideology. We see it in the Eastern architecture as well, has long prioritized a long bomb in the environment. This is also famously illustrated by Japanese homes that use sliding doors and traditional Engawa corridors to seamlessly merge the interior with the garden. These examples just illustrate that the inherent need to connect with the natural world it's always been a human constant. This connection transcends mere resource utility and serve instead as a vital source of spiritual and psychological nourishment that even our ancestors have recognized for a very, very long time. As our urban environment becomes more compact and the demand for innovative biophilic design grows, it makes the integration of green landscapes into our daily routines really a modern necessity that is imminent. So this leads us to biophilic design. Now, biophilic design has become somewhat of a thrown around phrase over the years and sometimes a bit of a dirty word. It's usually applied to any interior greening strategy. However, at its fundamental cause in design, it seeks to connect our inherent need to affiliate with nature beyond simple decoration. In the modern built environment, it is important to note that a key ideology of biophilic design is considering the space holistically and creating an overall setting or habitat rather than a single or isolated components disconnected from the whole. So in other words, the ecosystem performs at a greater level than the sum of its parts. So thinking of in the office, the sad little planter in the corner is not giving a biophilic benefit at all. In fact, it can actually do worse because it makes the feel unloved, neglected, not cared for. Within interior spaces, biophilic design should create a sensory experience that allows repeated and sustained engagement with nature. But faux plants and preserved moss walls are generally considered as examples of biophilic design. However, this is where I have a bit of contention with it, and I do separate a little bit. And I do wrestle with this classification of these falling under biophilic design, because though they do meet the standards of indirect experience of nature by stimulating the visual sense, for some, I don't think a lot of them are very passable as passing for real. They do fail to engage in any other meaningful way, except maybe collect and hoard dust. Although I will caveat that preserved moss walls do offer soundproofing. I would actually propose, and I am prepared to be wrong about this, that to successful, thoughtful biophilic design needs to stimulate more than just the one sense. It needs to go beyond just sight. We need to have tactility, whether that be through physical or regulating humidity, improving air quality. It could be soundproofing, softening edges, stop refractive sound. It could be scent, not necessarily just floral fragrance. It can be the freshness of foliage and the moisture of it, et cetera, et cetera. So I'm now going to present several architectural case studies that demonstrate the seamless integration of the exterior and the interior spaces which are a bit more modern than the ancient examples I previously gave. So a first one is going to be Frank Lloyd Wright's Falling Water is quite a famous example. We tend to focus on the hero shot and not the small details. This was completed in 1939 and it was inspired by Japanese aesthetics. Frank Lloyd Wright would frame the landscape to dissolve the boundary between human habitation and the natural world to create organic architecture, which is a philosophy where the building functions as a unified living organism in total harmony with its natural environment. So techniques such as integrating within the slope rather than perching on top of it, corner windows to dissolve the box are all techniques he employed. In this image, which is one of my favorite of this, we can literally see the window cutting through the garden and we can see the exterior plants in the garden on one side and the interior plants on the other side, which is a true convergence of the interior and the exterior from a really early example. Geoffrey Bower is another great example. He's considered the father of tropical modernism, and he frequently brought the outside in by utilizing plants as living architectural elements and allowing vegetation to integrate with the interior space, treating architecture and landscape as inseparable entities. He quite often employed open skylights to ensure constant connection with lights, plants, and elements. Of course, he was mostly based in Sri Lanka and tropical climate, so this was less of a challenge than it would be in a temperate climate like the UK or parts of Europe. If you haven't seen his Candelama Hotel, I would highly recommend it. It is absolutely beautiful. Sue Fujimoto both designs spaces that invoke a sense of stillness and private retreat within a high-density urban setting. Though you might not be able to tell from these photos, these are located in the middle of flourishing, dense cities. They appear so calm and otherworldly, though. Though I must admit, I'm not sure how much introspection and tranquility I would achieve in the second images. In the second image, it is undeniable that both designs reimagine the mundane and merge the interior with the exterior. And my last example is this project by Junya Ishigami, just because there's something about this image that is contemporary yet feels so homely as well. It incorporates interior plants unconstrained by pots and free to sprawl within the interior space, whilst the site user is actually bordered in between the flooring of the earth and the built floor. And this idea kind of intrigues me a little bit. How often do we actually take our shoes off and walk on grass, sand, or soil and experience the feeling of the earth through our feet? It doesn't seem like a radical idea to integrate a microforest into our commercial interior spaces or provide tactility through our feet, yet there almost seems nothing, yet there aren't many examples of this. And it almost seems something joyous and childlike about the idea of it. So these modern architectural examples all display a sense of escapism from the concrete jungle with a commonality for emphasizing and fulfilling the increasing need to recharge, find quiet solitude, and reconnect with nature away from the urban sprawl. Though they are primarily residential, they do imbue concepts and practices that need to be implemented into commercial spaces. So now I'm going to bring us all down with something thoroughly depressing, is that the average person spends roughly 1/3 of their life at work, totaling over about 90,000 hours of work in their life. But this is only based on the 40-hour work week, which is increasingly becoming a myth. It does not account for overtime, longer work weeks, or commuting time, which if you think about how cut off we are from nature going through the metros and the undergrounds, this disconnect we have is far more reaching. So this is far too much time spent in confined, sterile environments which lack natural stimulation. Consequently, it is the utmost importance for our mental, physical well-being that biophilic design moves beyond residential and exterior facades and is integrated directly into our interior workspaces. Beyond the aesthetics of all of this, the integration of indoor greening goes beyond aesthetic choices, is a strategic investment in employee performance and psychological well-being. Numerous studies highlight the tangible benefits of integrating interior landscape with the workspace. Some key, in a 2014 study published by the Journal of Experimental Psychology, applied by the University of Exeter, found that employees in workplaces enriched with plants were 15% more productive than those in minimalist environments. Further research indicates that natural elements can improve our focus up to 20% and memory retention by 15 to 20% by improving air quality and reducing CO2 emissions. Additionally, the University of Technology Sydney did a report on office plants and had reported a 60% reduction in stress levels among employees. Further studies in environment psychology have also linked indoor green to a 37% drop in tension and anxiety, a 58% decrease in depression, and a 38% reduction in fatigue. Oh, pardon me. Additionally, beyond this, additionally, plants also help reduce noise pollution by absorbing sound, especially in a lot of open concept office layouts. This helps support better focus, prevent fewer distractions, and some early promising studies have also linked to reduce sick leave by up to 30%, though this has not been extensively researched. We are only scratching the surface on the potential of interior greening can achieve, and I'm now going to run through some design examples on how interior landscaping has been utilized within the commercial spaces. But suffice to say, with these early initial research studies, that it is well within the employer's best interest to create green space within workspaces. So the first one I'm going to look at is transitional spaces. These are staircases, hallways, elevators, and they tend to be frequently unutilized spaces. Transitional spaces tend to be dynamic areas that facilitate movement, function, and connection from one space to the next. They are ideal for installing living walls, allowing high impact greening without inhibiting on the function, and a great opportunity to blur the boundaries as we move from the exterior into the interior. Instead of just tucking a few plants into a corner, we can turn every hallway and entrance into a living connection to the outdoors. And this shift satisfies a core biophilic requirement for repeated, sustained, and meaningful connection with nature as we move through our day. As we often move through these spaces, we tend to experience these spaces peripherally. So they are great opportunities to incorporate plants through physical touch as we brush along and go through the space. The next thing I'm going to look at is hero spaces. These tend to be grand interiors. These are spaces that make us go, wow. Hero spaces are usually the most impressive, significant, or evocative part of a building and are designed to anchor its identity. And these are often achieved by using grand scale, dramatic lighting, or materials or technology. They often tend to define place, giving a specific location meaning, value, memory through human experiences. These can be spaces for gathering. Furthermore, they facilitate passive wayfinding, which uses the built environment itself rather than signs to guide the user. These spaces can be great opportunities to have fun and design creative and playful landscape. Some great examples, Patrick Blanc, the Rainforest Chandelier, Sky Garden in London is a fantastic example of this. So is Gardens by the Bay, Singapore, the Highland, New York. All of these we tend to know by a singular name and don't even have to know the city it's in. These are great examples of defining place, and they realize the marvel of what we actually can achieve through landscape design. The next is humble spaces, and these are quite often overlooked on a surface level. They may appear to lack excitement and they're less flashy, but they really are the heart of landscape design for both interior and exterior spaces. They seek to create an inviting, comfortable space of intimacy. These are where we can escape to when we're fatigued by the monitor, we're having a really bad day, we just want to chat with a friend or a colleague. Hero spaces may inspire us, but humble spaces, they nourish us. These spaces succeed by focusing on details, the small touches, as they experience up close and intimately. They should include lush layering, textural changes, accessible elements, and division from larger spaces. And interplay between light and shadow are all key factors when designing humble spaces. The Japanese actually have a beautiful word that doesn't directly translate to English called komorobi, and it describes the dappled light dancing through shadows created by sunlight filtering through trees. This is a really great way of having an all year round tropical environment that also connects to the seasons outdoors with the natural light interplay. For interior spaces and for interior planters, the humble planter, I typically design using layering of plants. Troubles can be tightly packed together. That's how the natural habitat is, by providing center tall height plants, lush middle layers, and cascading foliage. First of all, this utilizes the vertical plane as much as possible, and it creates a sense of fullness and what I affectionately refer to as living arrangements. But they also have the benefit of creating a microclimate. Office spaces tend to run quite dry with the heating. So by packing plants together, through their process of transpiration, they will naturally increase their humidity and actually be healthier and happier in the environment as well. The next is spaces for gathering. These are often linked with humble spaces, but not exclusively. Gathering spaces utilize large plants displays and living walls to define social areas and guide movement without harsh partitions. Plantings are used to soften edges, diffuse sounds, and noisy gathering areas. In the workplace, this can be used to create gentle boundaries between collaborative breakout areas and quiet focus areas. They can create privacy in cubicle zones and to frame central social anchors like the office coffee hub. Respite, relaxation, and contemplation. These restorative and therapeutic landscapes are typically designed around reducing stress, improving mental, emotional, physical well-being, and they often employ flowing water, scented plants, and private areas of contemplation. This is where healing gardens really start to be incorporated into healthcare facilities. And there are many studies about in hospitals where even just having a window to a garden improves a patient's health. This particular project converted 6 shipping containers into private spa pods that are open to the elements through open skylights, and this resulted in a really strong sense of direct experience of nature. Though it does utilize exterior plants, it does function as an interior environment due to its closed-in architecture that functions as a room as we enter it. This did present a few challenges due to great fluctuations of the microclimate, both daily and seasonally, through the operation of the humidity, to the extreme cold when it wasn't operating, and then open to the snow of Canada to the hot summers. But it does create a real intimacy between the site user and the natural elements. So there's also obviously living plants require maintenance and compared to faux plants and moss walls, but functional needs can actually add to the experience. This particular installation is watered with above ground sprinklers and misters, which end up creating a daily sensory experience. Not only did the water cycles make the air more comfortable by counterbalancing the dryness from heating a large commercial atrium, but also made the space smell fresh, like a rainforest every morning as people entered on their way to their daily commute to their office. The last project I want to show you was only a temporary exhibition, but it was installed as an entry to a much larger exhibition. It aimed to make people think bigger about interior landscapes by immersing the site user within the green structure without actually closing them in. The hope was to inspire people from thinking of interior landscape elements as instead of being regulated to corners or walls, and instead consider them as three-dimensional sculptural elements that we can move around and exist within. It also helped to demonstrate a rich variety of plant species we can bring in indoors, textures and colors, and also different planting styles. Yes, it was a temporary exhibition, but don't worry, all plants found forever homes, and no plants were harmed in the making of this exhibit. And finally, biophilic design does promote positive interactions between people and nature that encourage an expanded sense of relationship and responsibility for the human and natural communities. But by bringing the outdoors in, we are not only satisfying our own need for connection to nature, but building a deeper connection and stewardship of the planet. The more we are around it, whether it's indoors, which although it doesn't affect pollinators, it makes us care about the exterior spaces as well. Modern technology and innovative planting systems now allow us to integrate greening into every single surface. Everything is up for grabs, both indoors and out. We have the potential to truly immerse ourselves in nature within the built environment. As Friedrich Hundertwasser said, what is the point of all our new materials if we do not put them to use to bring nature back into our cities and nourish ourselves? And that is all. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Alexander. That was great. Thank you so much. We'll have please write down any sort of a question for Alexander in a Q&A tab there, and we'll take the question after our next presentation. So do we have Matthew now?
We do.
Hi, folks. Thanks, Matthew. Yes, thank you so much. Thanks for joining. And sorry, I think there was a little bit misunderstanding. But no, thanks. Good to have you. And our next speaker is Matthew Clark. Let me introduce Matthew first, and in the meantime, Matthew can share the slides. So, Matthew, we can call him Matt. Matt has local authority air quality experience since 2010. And currently, he's working at Hertfordshire County Council where his role involves developing links between environmental health, housing, public health, transport, and sustainability functions. In 2025, Matt became the East of England Regional Clean Air Champion for the Clean Air Programme, taking a local authority voice to events across the four devolved UK nations. Matt also chairs the Herts, Beds and Neighbouring Authorities Air Quality Forum and is working with Department of Health and Social Care to create a regional cleaner air network. Matt is a partner lead on the INHABIT Hub, an advisory board member of Chile Hub, an active partner of Breathe In, that's another micro network plus, as well as an advisory board member of GREENIN. He is the member of CIEH, that I believe is the Chartered Institute of Environmental Health, as an environmental protection panel. And his past achievement includes working with Global Action Plan to create the first clean air night and delivering healthier air to over 20,000 Hertfordshire children by providing air purifier to classrooms. He is also the local authority representative to DEFRA's Air Quality Information System Review that is published in 2025. Matthew, it's a pleasure to have you. Great achievements. Over to you.
Thank you ever so much. Just bear with me. I've just lost the relevant screen, which has some of my notes on in the background. Right, there we go. There we go. I'm with you now. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the things that I know. So I'm a local authority person, been working in local authority, as mentioned, for now 16 years, and had a focus on air quality for the vast majority. In the last, I would say, probably 5 years, the internal sphere has become more important. And obviously GREENIN is talking about directly outside buildings and the internal sphere. And it's great to be invited here to speak a little bit about where local authorities have a touch point with this agenda. So I'm going to cover a few things throughout this session, looking at why local authorities should be interested in the indoor space, where those indoor spaces might be most relevant, or where local authorities might feel they have best agency to get involved. Things that we might be wary of. Local authorities can be quite risk-averse bodies, and it's important to be aware of things that concern us. And then moving on to how can someone like me get involved with research and the great things that go on. As we mentioned, a few of the things we're involved with there earlier: Chile Hub, INHABIT Hub, GREENIN, and Build Air, which has moved on and developed now into the Breathe In network. But it's someone like me who is full-time looking at air quality might find it, or might find the routes to connect. Someone that's doing air quality in their patch and they have maybe 1 day a week to do all the statutory functions might not have the time. So how can we do better in that space? And I'll finish off just with a little touch of flavour of what we're doing locally in Hertfordshire. So firstly, why should local authorities be interested in the internal space? Well, a common question that comes from the public to many local authorities is, why aren't you taking action over here? Why aren't you doing something over there? Why aren't you getting involved in this, that, the other? They're often very good questions in the context of where they're being asked, and very well meant. But in practice, local authorities are creatures of statute. They exist to deliver functions set out in legislation and only get involved in things outside that remit if there is clear policy direction that has been set politically by the administration, and if there's resource to do so. And as you can imagine, local authorities, like many organisations out there, struggling on the latter front there. Resource is slim. If we think about the air quality agenda, which is the aspect of environments that I really focus on, the legal framework, the legislative regime, is set to focus on outdoor or ambient air quality. When we're thinking about those spaces, we're looking at having a population-wide effect, trying to create impacts on a space to promote better air quality, so all of those using that space across the population feel the impact. But in my opinion, professional opinion, the objective levels that are set in statute, that were set decades ago, really aren't very ambitious. Okay, if we think about, for instance, nitrogen dioxide, classic pollutant from combustion of fossil fuels, a lot out the back of the tailpipe of a car. The legal threshold for annual average is set 4 times higher than the World Health Organization target level. So really, it isn't very ambitious. The types of pollutants in the outdoor realm that legislation fixates on, they may cover some of the right things, but they're certainly not as diverse as when we start to look at the indoor environment and what might be able to be considered there. And they haven't really moved on in time. We've moved forward, moving the particulate fraction down. We used to talk about PM10s many years ago when I started. Now it's all PM2.5s. But going ahead in future, will this become smaller fractions or even specific parts of those fractions due to toxicology analysis and data? The legal regime only looks at relative receptors. So a person may be only covered by the legislation if they're in a residential space, an educational setting, or a health setting. But if you are in a workplace in a really congested part of a town where none of those settings exist, the objective levels, the legal levels of pollution could be very, very high, but there's no onus on the local authority to take action. It sounds a bit of a nonsense. We're thinking public health. Obviously, there's a public health need, but the legislation doesn't cover those elements. So basically, what I wanted to kind of set the scene here was local authorities do things where there is a legal backdrop. And it's hard to do things outside of that. But we're here to talk more about the indoor space. So in the indoor space, we're spending more and more of our time in these spaces. There is a continuum between the outdoor air and the indoor air. Research published the other year showing about 80% of particulates in the air coming from outside migrating into a classroom environment, as an example. And we start to get a bit more individualistic, don't we, when we start to move inside a space. It's only the people using those buildings that are impacted, not like out in the ambient space, which is more population level. So we have then the Rose paradox comes into play, whereas from a public health perspective and local authority role, maybe we're looking at shifting the whole of the curve to get healthier air for everybody. In the indoor space, maybe that's starting to look a little bit more like actually acting on certain individuals. That becomes maybe more of a health service matter for those who are more at risk to air pollutants to be acted on in the best way to promote their health. So shifting the outliers on the curve towards the centre. But the really nice thing, the thing I would suggest for GREENIN and wider folks looking to engage with local authorities, there are some indoor environments where the whole population of the setting are the more at risk setting that sit outside of the total population as the outlier. So acting there is kind of a nice halfway house and is kind of accessing or looking to access healthier environments for the population as a whole and those for whom it matters most. And I feel those settings are places like schools and health sites, particularly GPs, hospitals, care homes. It's somewhere where that population or individual actors can be combined together and where we can bring health partners as well as local authority partners into the room together. So what are some of these areas within local authority where there might be an actor or a person who wants to get involved and think about the good work and the information and the research that will come out of networks such as GREENIN? Well, there's loads of hooks into local authorities if you know where to look. You can think about housing, where they might have other housing conditions to be considered, and things like damp and mold, very topical at the moment. There may be health and safety at work conditions to consider. I mentioned earlier that we don't cover workplaces in the local air quality management regime in statute. That's because a long time ago now, it was suggested that, well, if the working conditions aren't up to spec, that's a health and safety concern. It makes a bit of a disconnect to me there between the two different systems. You then got environmental protection people, folks like me, working in environmental health services across councils, and public health people as well. At the bottom, I've highlighted these both, but they're both, I'm both of those people, as it were. I'm an environmental health person who now works in a public health role. They consider things like air quality, and as the previous speaker, Alex, was mentioning, potential for noise impact from greening the indoor. So there's definite relevance there. There's then sustainability and adaptation, looking at blue and green infrastructure to mitigate against the challenges that may be coming with climate change. And importantly, local authorities are often building and designing some of those places that are then accessible to the public. We're building new schools, we're building care homes. So acting there has the potential to really ensure that the future builds of our time can be brought forwards, capturing the very best information, creating the best environment for those that are using them. So interesting settings then. I've mentioned these already, but I'm going to highlight now two areas I think are really key for things like greening as a network to be considering as they move forwards across their time. One is consideration of environments like schools. So as a local authority, I've just mentioned, we build them. It's within our gift to consider, how do we integrate greenery into the environment? How is that maintained? We will have all probably seen in our time internal and external green walls, which are not looking very green nowadays, unfortunately. So we need to think about how anything that's designed now is designing out the errors of the past and the things we know can be the downfall of some of the greening facets that we brought in the past. Obviously, schools are dealing with young children. They're a more at-risk group to air pollution and lifelong impact of having unclean air early in life. From a local authority perspective, looking to act and create healthier places for our children has great optics. You can imagine that an administration, so the political parties running a council, might be very pro doing lots of good things for children, and Hertfordshire's certainly is up there. If you look at the corporate plan, doing all good things for kids, giving the best start in life, is certainly one of the priorities that is linked through the corporate plan. The other area I would mention would be care homes. Again, may not realise this, local authorities are often building them. We also utilise them. We have adult social care, where we are accessing the needs for our residents by utilising care homes. You're often, if you are in a care home, you may be an older adult and you may also have an underlying condition. So you have a double whammy of more at-risk factors. And if we think about the more unpleasant bit of the agenda, I often feel, is putting pound signs on people's health a little bit. We're utilising care homes as local authorities. So if those care home environments are creating the healthiest environment for the folks that are living within them, that may mean that those care home settings are easier to manage, cost less to operate, and therefore the price of using them goes down, not just for local authorities, but for all. So take home here is that local authorities have access to local populations. We know where the community groups are, where patient groups are. We have close links to health services. We have several boards where local authorities are dealing with integrated care services and various trusts. So we know who and where research might want to be getting involved with. So we're quite a useful partner in that respect. But there are some barriers, as I mentioned, to local authorities getting involved in things. Time constraints is big. I've already mentioned I have the privilege of working full-time in air quality, and therefore able to get involved in things like GREENIN and put some time into these things. But it's a barrier, certainly, for many local authorities. Costs will also come up, not just of outlay for things, but of that staff time, potentially. Political challenges could be up there. Have you got something in policy or not that allows you to engage? Or how crucial is it for an administration to promote opportunities to get involved in the things that we're talking about here, bringing greenery indoors and connecting more with nature? There'll always be a bit of a thought towards potential unintended consequences for local authorities. You know, we're a group of regulators, or a bunch of us are a group of regulators. If you think about housing conditions, damp and mould, if we bring in lots of greenery in and all that greenery is holding a lot of moisture, is there a potential for creating some challenges in certain environments by bringing green in that creates other detrimental impacts? So those things always need to be carefully considered. Finally, I think that local authorities sometimes have a lack of knowledge about what's out there and the art of the possible, and we need a bit of a handhold to get us involved. And finally, you know, is there a process? Does the local authority have a process? Well, very pleased to say that as part of the work that the Clean Air Programme has done over the last couple of years, they have released a guide to allow or to inform local authorities and enable local authorities and universities, research partners to come together. So thanks to Dr. Nat Easton, Christopher Jones and Dr. Sarah Muller for pulling this together. It looks at where there's mutually beneficial things to be gained and guides people through the process. And it is an online resource that can be accessed with the link I've put here. I'll give you a little local example of this. The public backlash or external validation aspect on this slide. We've done a project putting air purifiers into schools. We worked with academics who looked at the data that was created and the impact, and were able to give us, you know, actually the impact of the air purifiers in these settings are creating about a 30% reduction in particulate exposure for the children involved. That was then taken as read by political minders and senior officers, enabling us to go forwards and do more. So I'd encourage people to have a look at that. Hopefully these slides will be circulating in some way or form after the fact, so people can get hold of this resource. And then finally, what are some of the things that happen in Hertfordshire? Well, we're communicating with our decision makers, first and foremost, really, really important. The picture there on the left, that was last week. We held our air quality seminar for councillors. We had some external speakers. We've got Alyssa there from the GREENIN network, who very kindly came to join us on the day. You might be able to see Gary Fuller in the front of that slide on the left as well. So we're engaging our councillors and decision makers, bringing them to the table, letting them hear from experts. And this is really helping us to move forwards and take action locally. Another thing we're doing is trying to set the right policy backdrop and strategy backdrop. We currently have an air quality strategy out for public consultation. And some of the key, these little snippets that I pulled out here that you can see on the slide are all key points that fall under the 5 outcomes which we're looking to achieve. And you can see that indoor air is very clearly stated as somewhere where we want to be. The healthier air concept, so not just thinking about the classic ambient pollutants, but everything in the makeup of the air, biological bits as well. Really important. I think that's an important thing for GREENIN to be thinking about as well. We're going to be looking at moving to prioritise interventions for those that need it most. I've talked about schools and care homes as potential settings, and we're really keen to ensure that we have touch point and have the ability to reach out, capture opportunities that come along with research partners to bring great work and great things to Hertfordshire, and then spread the word through the various connections that we have. And that brings me to the end, and we're ready for questions. The only last thing I wanted to say was all those pictures of plants that I've thrown in throughout the session are just pictures I took yesterday of house plants around my house here. One of them was fake. Did anyone spot the fake? You can maybe put it in the chat if you spotted the fake plant. Thanks, folks.
Thank you very much, Matthew. That was great, very interesting. So we'll now move to our Q&A session, and within this webinar, we have the Q&A. If someone has a Q&A, they can write down in the tab there, and I will sort of then take it forward from there. We have let me just quickly look at that. So there is a first sort of a question I could see is from Najem. And again, there is a thanks for a brilliant presentation, I think. And then this is more probably to Alexander. The question, if I'm summarizing it because it's quite long, that how can we implement this how can we implement this? I think it's about the greening, like what we were presenting about bringing the outdoor nature to the indoor with the, how can we implement this from the context of a third world country where such facilities are either non-existent or very, very limited? If Alexander, you want to sort of
Sorry,
respond
yes,
to that.
I was trying to find the question to read along with you, but
That is,
I'm struggling to find it.
yeah, that's on the top of
well,
the
actually,
Q&A.
it's in the chat section, not
Yeah.
in the Q&A section.
Oh,
I think
sorry,
what Zaheer is looking is at the chat section.
There we are.
Okay.
Okay. Sorry, the question was about integrating to a third world country where there's less development. Let's see.
So the question is how we implement this from the context of a third world country where such facilities are either non-existent or very limited.
It obviously does present one of the hardest ways to implement something if there's no funding. So that's obviously much harder to do that. But a lot of people can do it from a small grassroots thing. I previously lived in Vancouver, Canada, and there's a lot of examples of guerrilla gardening, they call it, on the verges where people garden themselves and implement the change they want to see in the world. People bring their own plants into the office cubicles all the time and do their own around their desk, and you can create your own microclimate as you need to. So you can start the change you want in your environment. You don't have to wait for employers or large corporations to do it. But Matthew Clark, working for the councils, petitioning councils to do it. It is in the council's best interest to look after the citizens. So you can go either way.
Okay, so I think there's quite a lot of questions. We'll go over them in the QA, and then we'll see how many we can take in the 10 minutes. So the first one is from Natalie. Do we know much about how to manage indoor greening to avoid mold, please? Because this is thinking of children and staff living with airborne allergies.
It depends on the spaces. So in a lot of commercial spaces, there is obviously a lot of heating systems. And also depends on the system you're implementing as well. So sitting water obviously is going to promote that. As Matthew brought up about transpiration raise the humidity. We know office spaces, malls, they all tend to run drier than it's actually comfortable for us. So this tends to naturally balance it out anyway. And then different systems, like especially particularly with living walls, they all will have a moisture barrier within the system, and they all should have an air cavity to allow airflow as well. So I haven't seen mold build up within commercial living walls before. I have seen mosses grow, and mosses are fantastic for air quality, and they don't affect allergy. Some plant selections do affect allergies as well. There is one that I happen to be sensitive to. And so that just becomes to more conscious plant selection. But that's also for in care facilities. There are exterior plants that just aren't good to use. The highly fragrant ones, people tend to get more sensitive with age. So there is definitely planting palette selection regards to that with the context. As far as residential spaces, especially with retrofits, you do have to be careful with that a little bit more. You want better air ventilation, and you want to avoid sitting water. This is a bit more likely to happen in the DIY solutions as opposed to tailored systems that obviously are going to balance this out normally.
Okay, thanks. I think we can go to the next question, Alexander. This is from
Zaheer. Just to come in on that, I think it's a really nice point there, because as I'm looking at utilization of the internal space, and I state in there, you've got those dead areas sometimes where you're not getting good air movement. That's really important to understand, isn't it? But I wonder if most building managers do understand that. Where actually is the best place to be thinking about putting that greenery so that you're not creating a challenge and you're getting the best worth. If those kind of messages can be sought out and brought forward and pushed out through networks like this, I think that some great things could then happen and follow.
I mean, the next question it's touching on those things, and I was bringing it to your direction, Matthew, because there is an element of planning in it. And this is a question from Gareth. How do we go about securing the indoor ergonomics layout with regard to planning condition and significance, and linking with the importance of the outside function should work together to achieve environmental functionality of the structures? So I think there's a question that can go from the sort of a, let's say, the private sort of a building, but it also is relevant to the public buildings, especially from the local authority point of view, that the role into the planning of these structures and how much of that sort of element of greening and the biophilic design at the moment taken into the consideration whenever those sort of planning the structures are, in place.
If I could maybe start, and Alex then follow up with something more specific, because I know he probably will.
Okay.
If I'm looking at the local authority point of view and what's put in front of us when something comes forward through the planning regime, we are looking at, does this fit the bill? Does this fit national policy, local policy? If it does, it gets built. I would expect the vast majority, if not all, local plans will not have something which talks about bringing green in. It may be a nice to have or a we would love to see this, but actually getting that through a planning inspector to be embedded within your local plan is probably a very hard ask, because it probably hasn't got a hook within the national planning policy framework. And it may become harder or easier depending on changes that are made to the national planning policy framework after the current consultation period is finished and government digests what has been fed back, because there is here and now there is a live consultation on the national planning policy framework. So that's all I would say. Really, there's limited potential for us to impose greening in those respects, other than obviously there's the biodiversity impact. That's usually an outside thing that's being looked at. Alex, sorry, you probably have more specifics to answer this.
No, that is absolutely correct about there's always, especially in the UK, there's definitely a box to tick that whether people want to or not about the exterior, but the interior is normally about looking good, and people don't really focus on what it can actually do outside of that from a developer point of view, particularly. It's obviously much easier to design with at the start as opposed to a retrofit where you're a lot more limited, but we're talking about planning conditions and indoor planning, but there are many systems. So if we're talking about interior garden beds, that's a very different system to interior living walls, which are weighted on the structure. Not that not all living wall systems have a lot of weight to them, but still it depends on the specifics of what we're talking about to install actually. But and so obviously the planning stage is obviously going to make it more functional, as opposed to quite often when we move into a space and most people who want to do things offices, it's people who've taken over a rental of a space and they're going to do things like pot plants and movable things and things that aren't fixed they're not going to alter the architecture as much. So it really depends on what way we're looking at it in that aspect as well. But there's absolutely no push for developers to do interior planting whatsoever. And so that is one of the harder things. Canada was a little bit unusual. They don't even have biodiversity goals to hit for exterior either, but there's a lot of interior planting because it is twice as much rain as Vancouver has twice as much rain as London on average. It's a lot colder, so that is where people are going to experience the nature, and so people will rent out offices because they are nicer inside. So there was a human-driven trait into getting those spaces done, rather a governmental specific outcome to achieve.
Okay, great. I think there are so many questions that we may not be able to take in the next sort of a couple of minutes. I'm keen to sort of finish it on time, but I'll go with one question, maybe 1.5 question. The one biggest question, I think it again touches around this. There is a big question from Reese, and there is another sort of an element related to that one of bringing sort of a plants to indoor is relevant to I think I was reading it towards the insect population. So the reason, I think, to summarize it, and both they are looking, the question is around that when you try to sort of green indoor spaces, and especially the sort of presentations and the examples we have seen, when it comes to the real world scenarios in the houses, 1 bedroom house, 2 bedroom house, a terraced house, and all of those things, when you bring these things indoor, how do they sort of become relevant, and what is the implication of bringing that huge sort of nature from outside to inside in terms of the mold, in terms of the bacteria, especially allergies, dampness related issues, and especially keeping into the mind the population that is sort of the social sort of a set of those sort of a conditions, the people living in those conditions, Also, that is again broadly in terms of impact of indoor greening on the environmental conditions that may not be as positive as we thought at the point of introducing these things.
Are you talking specifically to residential spaces, bringing to the
That was
homes,
the
opposed to
question,
commercial?
yes. Like
Yeah,
bringing people, and in reality, that when you get into the home, because most of the residential spaces may not be as big as commercial ones, and this is a general sort of a reality, I think. And this is like vast populations. I think people are interested to know more
Yes.
that what happens when they do this in their indoor homes.
Yeah, so typically with mold, it's constant moisture on a surface. Is obviously the obvious start of one. So normally that shouldn't be happening in any aspect. And then the transpiration, I mean, if you have incredibly high humidity, especially in winter, it's going to feel a lot colder for you. So people naturally tend to either dehumidify the house or they turn the heating up, and that balances out normally anyway, because we do spend so much time into it, especially in the evenings, that we actually naturally adjust our interior climate for our comfort anyway. So it is unusual to have someone to sit there shivering in the cold humidity, which is going to allow the mold of the transpiration of the plants to breed. And again, because you do have those barriers from the physical surrounds of it, you shouldn't be having mold from touching proximity in that aspect. So you would have to have I've only had one project where it was an incredibly high density of, it was 8,000 plants into a space where we actually did have to balance out humidity levels for it. And that went through quite a lot of planning aspects for it. But I mean, we see people with mad plant collectors where it's laid everywhere and they don't have the mold problems. I mean, there are also people who are mad plant hobby collectors also make sure the internal temperature doesn't drop below 14 degrees in winter for the plant health. So normally for interior spaces, you specify that you don't want temperature to drop below 14 and go above 26 degrees. So when you're at that heating aspect, you actually dry out your air anyway.
Okay. One last question. I think, Matthew, you can also incorporate to this. I think, and one of the things is that, is there any sort of an advice on the plants that can repel insects, or let's say repel molds, and rather than sort of bringing them in, they can reduce it. But Matthew, I'm sorry, there's one question as well I wanted to ask Matthew. There was a question around here that, is there any sort of an impact we have seen on sort of greening indoors in the educational environments? And I think the question is probably about, like increasing the productivity. So these are the two last things, okay? And then we should close it.
So just on that last point, I don't know. I'm not the expert in this space.
Okay.
So I think that's certainly something, again, if there is research out there, bringing that to the fore so that folks like me can then promote it to schools if there's a beneficial impact. I mean, we know that things like there's been, if you are admitted to hospital and are looking out on a green vista rather than a brick wall, you will recover faster. This research has been done. So you would expect there would be a beneficial impact on well-being in those spaces. But I can't tell you a definitive. And sorry, you might have to repeat the first
There was actually a study on students with if they went for a 50-minute walk outdoors, how much they were more productive at learning. And it didn't matter if they enjoyed it or not. It could be the study was in the cold snow in Missouri, and though they were miserable, their productivity when they went back inside increased greatly. But they couldn't have their phones on them was the other rule. So good luck doing that with students.
Just flicking back to the last question that Alex answered so well, I think when we're bringing things in and avoiding some of the potential consequences, this comes down to the management of the scenario, doesn't it? The management of internal space. And as someone that looks at larger buildings where it isn't just one individual doing a thing in their own space, one of the things that's very key to me and key thought process to me going forward is where you rely on an individual in a bigger system taking forward the action for that space, expect it to fall over at some point. Where you can ensure that the building design function of the building does things for you, you are much more likely to get the longest betterment without things falling down because someone wasn't there, so it doesn't happen. You know, the person that usually wanders around and waters the plants goes on long-term sick, all the plants die. The person that's turning the air purifiers on in the school before the kids arrive leaves the school, goes somewhere else, no one turns the air purifiers on. Whereas if those are integrated into the building's function, so air purification fitted to mechanical ventilation systems, or watering of plant systems integrated to the building itself with sensors to do the right things, then you're cutting out the person element. You know, it's always us people, isn't it, that break the system.
Yeah.
The system's great until you add people, and then it breaks. So I think that's where architects and building designers and engineers really come to the fore and be able to solve some of these solutions and put tools into our hands to be able to deliver in future.
Well, especially with large projects, we won't install without flow sensors that will pin our phones, letting us know that if someone's turned the water off. Our living pillars, which are exterior, they have sensors that if there's a high wind and the soil dries out, it lets the system know and it'll water it automatically to give it a water cycle. We have all the tools at our disposal to do it. It's prior thinking that needs to be done for it, sort of thing. There's obviously pot plants are the one that fails the most. As you said, if the worker's away or it's a long weekend and miss the Monday, then that's obviously the hardest one. But they're also the cheapest to replace if things go pear-shaped.
Thank you, Alexander and Matthew. I think there are still few questions, but we have touched most of them on the topical issues. So we should move to close this. We're already a couple of minutes, but I really enjoyed this. Okay, and I think if we continue this discussion, there's a great discussion. I will urge, I think, anybody who is there, you can reach out to our sort of speaker. You can reach out to us if you have any questions, and we'll ensure that we'll get back to you with the responses. First of all, let me thank Matthew and Alexander. It was great to have both of you. You can see the interest in the topic. I have been into the few of other webinars, and I must say that this is the one I found it very engaging. There is a huge number of presence from the people as well, and then there is also loads of questions. I'm sorry that I couldn't take all the questions to the panel. But let me close this with giving you a quick sort of information about our next seminar. So the next lunchtime seminar, again, we are bringing you two presenters. One is a PhD student at Surrey that will be sort of showcasing the impact of low-cost greening interventions on indoor air quality in a naturally ventilated classroom. Here you go. The last question was this: do we have any evidence or studies? So the studies are coming up, how the greening sort of impacts the classroom environment. And then second presentation from the Martin King, who is a site manager at Rooted in Hull, how growing plant positively impact people. So that will be our sort of a next seminar presentations. And that is the last slide, I think. So I'll again say thank you so much for joining us. You can become a member of GREENIN if you are not at the moment. And again, I will say that when you receive an email about the webinar, please do register, because if you won't register, you won't get the link. So it was a great to have you, all of you, with us today. Have a lovely afternoon, and thank you so much for joining us today.